This is a chart containing the yearly averages of every NASCAR driver who competed in the full seasons from 2013 to 2017. The two parameters are that they had to have raced for a team that at least made the playoffs, therefore showing some semblance of competitiveness, and they had to have run every race throughout that time span, so guys like Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, and Dale Jr. need not apply. Towards the top you'll find the regulars like Kevin Harvick and Joey Logano. On the bottom you'll find dips, like when Martin Truex first moved to Furniture Row, or when Clint Bowyer had to suffer a season with H. Scott Motorsports. You have your peaks and valleys, but for the most part they stay confined to this row, from 10th to 20th. Well, all except for this one. This driver competed in every race in the same time frame for a team that didn't just make the playoffs, but competed for and won multiple championships. And yet not once could they even crack the top 20. I spend a lot of time talking about these guys, the greats, the franchises, the strong statistical superstars who forge everlasting legacies. But for once, let's talk about the opposite. I want to ask you a question, and I'll give you a moment to think. Who is the worst NASCAR driver? The one who soared higher than most but still flew too close to the sun? Maybe you think of the driver who started the most races without a win. Perhaps you're thinking of the one who rose to the pinnacle of another series only to falter in this one. Maybe they were billed as the next great thing when in reality they were anything but. All solid choices, but what if I told you that all of these attributes and more that you're probably not even thinking of can be found in this driver? A driver who most of you already know. I should preface by saying this. She has more talent in her pinky toe than I could ever hope to have in my whole body. And to those of you thinking you could beat her one-on-one, you should probably hear the cautious tale of the Scallenge, a show hosted by former NBA player Brian Scalabrine. You see, most players who get their own show are already established household names, but Scalabrine was the opposite. He averaged only 3 points per game and spent most of his career on the bench, leading many fans to throw shade on the journeyman. Here's the thing though. Even when you're the worst player in the NBA, you're still in the top 450 of all basketball players on earth. So when he gave those talking the talk a chance to walk the walk, he ended up dog-walking them in what has to be one of the most embarrassing displays of athleticism I've ever seen.
I may suck for an NBA player. Those guys are pretty good. But I don't suck compared to you. You suck compared to me.
It was a cold but true reminder that even when you're the worst of the best, you're still one of the best. And I have to respect that. With that being said, let's talk about Danica Patrick, the Brian Scalabrine of NASCAR. Her origins can be traced back to the Sugar River Raceway in Brodhead, Wisconsin, where she got her start driving go-karts at just 10 years old. In her debut race, she suffered a brake failure, causing her to collide with a concrete wall at 25 miles an hour. A lesson in safety for a young racer, or perhaps some cruel foreshadowing. Either way, it didn't really matter, because in the preceding race she rebounded all the way to a second-place finish, and eventually found her way to multiple track records, regional karting titles, and 3 World Karting Association Grand National Championships. She knew how to take the top step, and after attending multiple high-profile driving schools, she was ready to take the next step to driving cars. She spent 3 years overseas in England in lower division Formula Leagues, with arguably her most impressive performance coming in the 2000 Formula Ford Festival, where she finished second to future F1 driver Anthony Davidson. This got her into a Formula 3 test that was supposed to lead to a spot in Paul Stewart Racing's development program under Jaguar, opening her up to the possibility of Formula 1. That is until Niki Lauda fired Bobby Rahal, the program's manager, which left Patrick with nothing left to do but move back to the States. As if that wasn't bad enough, Ford terminated her contract, BMW wouldn't let her race in the American Le Mans Series, and the most success she could find was winning her class in the 2002 Toyota Pro Celebrity Race, where she was beaten by swimmer Dara Torres and actor Christopher Masterson. Never mind that 30-second head start, I'm sure that had nothing to do with it. The opportunities were drying up. The most action she'd see for a while were 5 starts in the Barber Dodge Pro Series and a 2-day test in a NASCAR Busch Series car. We'll get back to that. It got to a point where Patrick and her father were traveling to the tracks hoping that anyone would hire her on site. Though, as it would happen, her salvation would come from a familiar face, as Rahal Racing signed her to drive in the 2003 Toyota Atlantic Championship. Now, I'm no open-wheel aficionado by any means, but some of the names in this league even I recognize. AJ Allmendinger, Joey Hand, John Fogerty, Simon Pagenaud, this league was no joke, and one would be forgiven in assuming that Danica would take a while to adjust. If it wasn't enough that she was surrounded by oodles of talent, she was also the first woman to compete in the series in almost 30 years. Though all the doubt would be quelled when come the first race in Mexico, she would become the first woman to score a podium ever, and later become the first to take a second-place finish, the pole, and hold the points lead. She might not have won a race in this series, but her performances proved that she had more than enough raw talent to hang with the best. And after 2 promising years, she would not only get the chance to challenge the best, but become the best, as she would make her long-anticipated leap to IndyCar. Hype is a word you're going to hear a lot more later on, but even in the moment in the opening race of the 2005 IndyCar season, the hype was real. ESPN saw as much as a 40% increase in TV ratings, and while her first race would end in a pretty scary crash, her results would eventually improve. Her best finish of the year might have been one spot away from a podium, but she still made history by matching an IndyCar Series record with 3 poles in her rookie season, as well as finding herself with the lead late in the running of that year's Indy 500.
Look at this! And the crowd is jumping up and down, Todd. Look at this, it's absolutely amazing.
Danica Patrick is for real, and she leads.
Come 2006, things would only get better as she would finish the season in 9th place, and with a move to the now Andretti Autosport would find her first podiums and improve to 7th, then 6th, and then 5th by the end of 2009. But all of this pales in comparison to the year before, when she captured what could be considered the crowning moment of her entire career.
Danica Patrick coming out of 4, and boys, move over. The lady is coming through. Danica Patrick wins at Twin Ring Motegi.
Although she would drop to a 10th place ranking in 2010 and 2011, she had solidified a strong presence with a total of 124 laps led, 7 podiums, the win in Japan, and an average finish of 10.8. For comparison, the 2022 IndyCar champion, Will Power, has a career average finish of 9th. Had she stuck around and continued to develop, she very well could have won a slew of more races and, who knows, maybe even taken a stab at the Astor Cup. But instead, she decided to branch out into murkier waters. The ARCA Racing Series. But wait, why would she want to do that? She's an open-wheel star, possible future champion, and hell, if the cards fall just right, a possibility for Formula One. Why would she want to throw all of that away just to drive in circles? Well, as you might have noticed, she's gotten quite the paint job. Now sporting a bright highlight green livery, GoDaddy.com went all in on their partnership with Danica. They had her doing commercials, photo shoots, commercials, merchandising, commercials, and some more commercials. And in return, they would pay out big time, like go anywhere and do anything you want big time. She had her eyes on stock car racing for a good while, and while she was an esteemed IndyCar driver, the pageantry and flashiness of stock car racing was just too much to ignore. So after her second stock car test, this time at Daytona, she would be back a few months later to make her ARCA Series debut. She only ran this one race, but the race happened to be the epitome of ARCA as a whole, as nearly half the laps were run under caution, and of the 43 starters, only 19 finished on the lead lap. Danica, however, seemed to fare pretty well, and despite Nelson Piquet saying Dinoco is all mine, she managed to claw her way back to a respectable 6th place finish. A solid first showing, and one that could inspire a promising future, provided that she prove herself in ARCA, maybe run a few years in the trucks, and then just maybe nab a ride in the Nationwide Series. She would skip straight to the Nationwide Series. Literally a week after her first stock car race, she would be back at Daytona to run the day before the 500. And needless to say, things did not go according to plan.
Multiple car crash, including Danica Patrick, among many others, here on the front straightaway.
She made 13 starts that season, none of which she could manage a finish higher than 19th. And compared to every other driver who made starts with Junior Motorsports, she had the worst average finish of 28th. For any other driver running their first races in a stock car, let alone motherfucking NASCAR, this would be respectable. But you have to remember, we're talking about one of the most renowned racers in the country and maybe even the world, both in praise and popularity. Just her name being on the entry list guaranteed a goose in ticket sales and TV ratings. The hype surrounding her was palpable, but as her IndyCar performances dwindled and her NASCAR performances never really took off to begin with, people began to speculate. Maybe she didn't have it. Maybe she finally found the one place where she couldn't shine. Most people with that kind of doubt would see it as a defeat, but Danica, she saw it as a challenge. She continued to run a similar schedule in 2011, and while IndyCar would see her first podiumless season in 5 years, NASCAR would see an uptick. Whereas she couldn't finish higher than 19th in the previous year, she would open the season with no finish worse than 17th, her personal best being a 4th place finish in Las Vegas. This would turn out to be the best finish of her career, but in the moment it was seen as something to build on, and in 2012, for the first and only time, she was given a full season to run the Nationwide Series. Now credit where credit is due, the stats don't really tell the full story, because while her finishes weren't much better, a lot of it had to do with some really shitty luck, with the worst of it coming in Montreal. She had already led laps before, but for the first time since her days since IndyCar, she looked to be the one to beat, until about halfway through the race when this happened.
That is someone's shoe. And then here comes Danica, and bam, drop kicks it.
For the remainder of the race, she had to battle her ill-handling Impala to a 27th place finish. It was a tough pill to swallow, but still a strong showing, giving her the utmost confidence when she no doubt returned to the Nationwide Series for another year. Alright, we need to talk. I know she's one of the most marketable drivers in history and, like Tony Stewart, exhibited gobs of potential on the Indy circuit, but can we get some perspective? Most of these guys have been running these kinds of races since they were able to walk, whereas she ran her first ever stock car race just 2 years ago, and now she'd be thrown to the wolves, competing against some of the best drivers in the world. In retrospect, it was a disaster waiting to happen. There's a reason why so many of today's stars have to languish with inferior equipment before they get their big break. Unless you're Shane Van Gisbergen, you don't just come into this league and dominate. But Danica was good for it and ready to take her shot. Alright, let's see what you got.
Oh, hard already. The wall. Slams to the outside. It's 5-time champion Joe. He collects Danica Patrick.
Lap 2. In the second lap of the Daytona 500 and her Cup Series career, she turned down into David Reagan to avoid the spinning Jimmy Johnson, only to plunge them both into peril as they ran into him anyway. And that's not to mention her hard crash a few days earlier in the Gatorade Duel. It was a rough start, and as the season carried forward, one thing would become clear. She was in way over her head. Despite driving for the defending championship team, she couldn't manage a finish higher than 17th, and to be fair, she was literally shoved into that position. Though no other race in 2012 quite summarized her season like week 32 in Kansas.
Danica Patrick, Landon Castle tangled up. Castle going for a slide.
Yeah, we did not hit anything. Did not hit anything. Well, rule number one of stock car racing is learn how to wreck someone without wrecking yourself.
Like her first year with Junior Motorsports, she wrapped up a 10-race stint with an average finish of 28th. Although, unlike her other rookie campaigns, this one didn't hold a lot of promise. It just didn't seem like she was comfortable. Certainly not ready for a full-time ride in the Cup Series. I think you know how this goes by now.
Danica Patrick will join the team for her rookie year in the NASCAR Sprint Cup Series. Both she and Stewart say even if she struggles on the track, she can still be a valuable teammate.
In the first race of the year, where she wrecked out on lap 2 in the year before, she managed to pull off what I believe is the single best performance of her tenure in NASCAR. She got the pole. She led the first laps of her career. She became the first woman to lead a lap in the Daytona 500, and she captured a career-best 8th place finish, all in one day. For being such a snooze fest, this race gave Stewart-Haas the reassurance that they had made the right choice. So how about the next race?
Low treble front straightaway. Big pileup. Danica Patrick and the 34, David Reagan.
Ugh, well, at least you still have plenty of races left.
Into the wall. 2 cars hard in the wall in turn 3. Danica Patrick and Brad Keselowski.
Alright, just try to keep it in one piece.
And now we get a caution. It's our 4th of the day, and this time for Danica Patrick.
Oh, okay, stop.
Oh, trouble. Travis Kvapil, Danica Patrick, Jeff Burton.
Please just stop.
Cars in the wall. Danica Patrick, David Ruderman, and more down in the grass.
Good God, that was hard to watch. Daytona would turn out to be the only laps led or top 10 finish for the entire year, as she could only manage a 27th place points finish at season's end. And as for all those expectations,
completely demolished.
Come 2014, some big changes would be made to the team, as Ryan Newman swapped places with Kevin Harvick and Kurt Busch would expand the operation to 4 cars. People thought that the still young Stewart-Haas might not be ready for such an expansion, but they swiftly silenced the doubters, with the 2 new recruits picking up wins and Harvick even winning the team its 2nd championship. As for Danica, she wasn't quite up to snuff with her teammates, but her finishing positions did follow suit, as she managed a career-high 3 top 10 finishes, 2 of which weren't even on super speedways and required some genuine, honest-to-God talent to pull off. It was glimpses like these that kept hope in her alive, though sadly, like Vegas in 2011, these would turn out to be the best finishes of her entire career. Spoiler alert, this right here, this is as good as it would ever get. 6th place. She would pick up a few more top 10s throughout the rest of her career, but could never manage a points finish better than 24th, or an average finish better than 22nd. Still, she managed to keep her ride with Haas all the way up until 2017, when ahead of the final race at Homestead, she finally announced her retirement from the Cup Series. By my count, her NASCAR career consisted of 42 wrecked race cars, and those are just the ones that couldn't finish the race. There are so many more examples of times she couldn't keep her wheels underneath her, and as heartbreaking as it was befitting, her final race would feature one more example.
And I'm sure not the way that Danica Patrick wanted her final full-time season to end.
That is until a few months later when she would sneak her way into one more wreck.
Contact! Elliott! Slam into the wall!
Are you kidding me?
And just for good measure, she would make one final start in the Indy 500, which would end in the same way.
Trouble. Danica Patrick. And that will be how her driving career in Indianapolis ends.
No matter how big a fan or hater you might be, you have to admit, this is cruel. You want to make one final start in your trademark car? You get to climb out of it while it burns to the ground. You want to make one final start in NASCAR's biggest race? You get collected in a massive pileup. You want to make one last start in the biggest race on the planet? You're sent careening into the Turn 2 wall. Despite being one of the most prolific female racers of all time, the racing gods didn't spare her an ounce of sympathy. And that's how it would end, smoking and sitting in silence. Well, that was sad as hell, but hold your tears because I'm not done. Sure, she's wrecked a lot of race cars, but so has Ricky Stenhouse and Austin Dillon, and yet they still found success. Why couldn't Danica? I truly don't know. It's hard to make fair comparisons to the rest of the field, as every driver receives a different quality of equipment, but hers was proven to win plenty of races and championships. In fact, of all the drivers to race for Stewart-Haas in the Cup Series, only 3 of them have failed to win a race. Daniel Suarez, who only got 1 year, Ryan Preece, who's currently in his first year, and yours truly. She had 6 years and 191 chances to prove that she belonged, and she just couldn't. And by the way, no one will ever get that many chances to lose in that kind of equipment ever again. I mean, the teams just can't afford it. Just as Kevin Harvick outclassed his teammates every single year, Patrick was outclassed by her teammates every single year, besides 2015 when Tony Stewart forgot how to drive. And as for her replacement, in just 1 year, Aric Almirola managed 17 top 10s, 4 top 5s, a win, and a spot in the playoffs, which he would ride all the way to the round of 8, and a 5th place points finish. All numbers that Danica Patrick couldn't even come close to in her entire career. And if you need one more argument as to why she should have just stayed put, let's head back to Kansas and pause it right here. If she keeps her foot on the brake and wheel to the left, she could escape with, at worst, 4 flat tires. But she comes from IndyCar, where such action would put her in an uncontrollable tailspin. So what does she do?
Yeah, at that point right there is whenever you should just, as a driver, realize that this is a spin, lock it down, and you can come get 4 tires. And that's the kind of things that you'll have to learn with these cars.
It probably looked good on paper, the most popular American race car driver moving to the most popular American motorsport. But in practice, she became one of the biggest disappointments in modern NASCAR. And the worst part is, it didn't have to be that way. She was easily one of the best IndyCar drivers in her prime, and with the level of publicity and exposure she brought to the sport, she could have helped IndyCar get the ratings they so desperately deserve. Hell, with all of the open-wheel stars making one-offs these days, who knows? Maybe in another timeline, she's the one driving a GoDaddy 91 car to victory lane in Chicago. But that possibility will forever remain just that, a possibility. So is she the worst race car driver? No. Is she the worst NASCAR driver?